The rain lashed against the windows of Thornfield Hall as Miss Lillian Reed pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching her pathetic reflection fade in and out with each flash of lightning. She clutched the crumpled letter from the agency in London, her 5th placement in 3 years, and likely her last chance at respectable employment. "Remember your place," she whispered to herself, rehearsing the mantra that had guided her since the orphanage doors had closed behind her at 16. Beauty is a curse for girls without fortune or family. Keep your head down, your voice soft, your manner unremarkable. For years as a governess had taught her that invisibility was her only protection in the grand houses of England. In her previous position, the master's eldest son had noticed her, pursued her with flattery and false promises, only to deny everything when his mother discovered his attentions. Lillian had been dismissed without references, accused of seducing the heir. The carriage had deposited her at Thornfield in the middle of a spring storm, and the housekeeper, Mrs. Winters, a severe woman with iron-grey hair pulled tight beneath her cap, had barely looked at her while showing her to this small, cold bedchamber in the east wing. "His Grace returns tomorrow from London. You'll present yourself after breakfast to discuss the education of Lady Emma. The child has exhausted 3 governesses already this year." The housekeeper had paused at the door. "The Duke of Lanchester does not tolerate frivolity or excessive emotion in his household. You would do well to remember that." Lillian turned from the window and opened her small trunk, unpacking the few possessions that defined her existence: 3 serviceable black dresses, a worn Bible, a silver hairbrush, her only inheritance from parents she could barely remember, and a dog-eared copy of Milton's poetry. She touched the tarnished brush, tracing the engraved initials of her mother. "I shall not fail this time," she promised the empty room. "I shall be exactly what they require, nothing more, nothing less." As she prepared for bed, Lillian reminded herself that attachments were dangerous for women in her position. She had learned through bitter experience that a governess was neither servant nor family, existing in a precarious middle ground with no protectors. Her beauty, which the matron at the orphanage had once called an unfortunate liability for a penniless girl, had brought her nothing but trouble. The storm raged through the night, and Lillian slept fitfully, dreaming of faceless men making promises they never intended to keep. Morning brought watery sunshine and the distant sound of horses in the courtyard. From her window, Lillian caught her first glimpse of the Duke of Lanchester as he dismounted, tall, broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by the brim of his hat. Even from a distance, she could sense the authority in his bearing, the cold confidence of a man accustomed to command. Mrs. Winters collected her promptly at 10 o'clock. "His Grace will see you now," she announced, leading Lillian through a labyrinth of corridors to a mahogany door. "Speak only when addressed. The Duke values brevity." Lillian smoothed her plain black dress, patted her tightly bound hair, and entered the study with appropriately downcast eyes. "Miss Reed, Your Grace," Mrs. Winters announced before withdrawing. The Duke of Lanchester stood with his back to her, staring out tall windows that overlooked the estate's expansive gardens. He did not immediately acknowledge her presence. Lillian waited in silence, hands clasped before her, the proper posture of deference she had perfected over years of service. "They tell me you have excellent qualifications, Miss Reed." His voice was deep, commanding, yet strangely hollow. He still did not turn. "Cambridge recommended you specifically." "I am proficient in mathematics, Latin, French, Italian, drawing, and music, Your Grace," Lillian replied, her voice carefully modulated to convey competence without pride. "And yet you have held 4 positions in 3 years." Now he turned, and Lillian felt the full force of his gaze, dark eyes beneath severe brows, a face that might have been handsome if not carved into an expression of perpetual displeasure. A jagged scar ran from his right temple down his cheek, disappearing beneath his collar. "Yes, Your Grace." Lillian kept her gaze level but respectful. Explain. The single word contained both command and dismissal. Lillian had prepared for this question. The first family relocated to India with the East India Company. The second position ended when my young charge was sent to boarding school. The third when the family suffered financial reversals. The most recent. She hesitated. The truth, Miss Reed. I have no patience for fabrications. The eldest son made improper advances. When discovered, he claimed I had encouraged him. I was dismissed without references. Lillian delivered the facts without emotion. The Duke's expression did not change, but something flickered in his eyes, a recognition, perhaps, or a calculation. And did you encourage him? No, Your Grace. Why should I believe you? You should not, Lillian replied evenly. You know nothing of my character. I can only perform my duties and allow time to demonstrate my integrity. For the first time, the Duke's expression shifted, slight surprise, quickly masked. He walked to his desk, lifting a sheet of paper. Lady Emma is 8 years old. Her previous governesses described her as willful, impossible, and demon-possessed. The last fled in the middle of the night claiming the child had tried to poison her tea with belladonna from the gardens. He looked up. Do you still wish the position? Is Lady Emma your daughter, Your Grace? The Duke's face hardened. My ward. My brother's child. He and his wife died in a carriage accident 3 years ago. I see. Lillian nodded. Children who have suffered loss often express their grief through rebellion. I would welcome the opportunity to teach Lady Emma. Very well. He rang a small bell, summoning Mrs. Winters. Miss Reed will meet Lady Emma after luncheon. Provide her with the curriculum I approved. As Lillian turned to leave, the Duke spoke again. Miss Reed. She paused, waiting. There is one absolute rule in this household. The West Wing is forbidden to all staff. Under no circumstances are you to enter it, or encourage Lady Emma to do so. Violation means immediate dismissal. Is that understood? Yes, Your Grace. You may go. Lillian curtsied and departed, feeling the weight of his gaze follow her out the door. Only when she reached the corridor did she allow herself a deep breath. Something about the Duke of Lanchester unsettled her, not merely his commanding presence or the scar that marred his features, but the emptiness she had glimpsed behind his eyes. It was a hollowness she recognized, for she saw it in her own reflection each morning. Lady Emma proved every bit as challenging as promised. A small girl with dark curls and her uncle's penetrating eyes, she greeted Lillian by announcing, I made Miss Hutchinson cry every day for a week before she left. How very inefficient of you, Lillian replied calmly. If you wished her gone, surely one good day of tears would have sufficed. Emma's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with calculation. Uncle James says I'm incorrigible. The Duke is entitled to his opinion, Lillian said, setting out books on the schoolroom table. I prefer to form my own judgments. Shall we begin with mathematics or French? I hate numbers and French is stupid. Then we shall begin with both, as they are clearly areas requiring improvement. What followed was a battle of wills that lasted through the afternoon, Emma refusing tasks, Lillian calmly insisting, neither raising their voices but each testing the other's resolve. By 4 o'clock, Emma had completed a page of sums and conjugated basic French verbs, albeit with much sighing and dramatic declarations of impending death from boredom. You're not like the others, Emma said as they finished for the day. They either tried to be my friend or threatened to tell Uncle James when I misbehaved. I am neither your friend nor your enemy, Lady Emma. I am your governess. My responsibility is your education. Emma studied her with unexpected perceptiveness. "You're pretty." The others were old and pinch-faced. "Uncle James won't like that. He doesn't like pretty women in the house." "My appearance is irrelevant to my duties," Lillian replied, though she felt a flutter of unease. "Now, please practice your piano for 30 minutes before dinner." Later, as she prepared for bed, Lillian reflected on her first day. The Duke had not reappeared, taking his dinner in his study according to Mrs. Winters. The housekeeper had also informed her that she would dine with Lady Emma in the nursery, not with the household staff below stairs, another reminder of the governess's ambiguous position, neither family nor servant. The next 3 weeks fell into a pattern. Lillian worked with Emma each day, gradually earning a grudging respect from the child. They took daily walks in the gardens, read together in the library, and practiced music in the afternoons. The Duke remained a distant figure, occasionally passing them in corridors with a curt nod but never stopping to inquire about Emma's progress. Lillian learned from the servants that James Lanchester had not always been so cold. Before inheriting the dukedom unexpectedly upon his father's death, he had been known for his charm and wit. His marriage to Lady Beatrice Caldwell had been a love match, unusual among the aristocracy. But tragedy had struck 6 years ago. His wife and infant son had died in childbed, and the Duke had withdrawn from society, earning the nickname the Winter Duke for his frigid demeanor. He swore he'd never marry again, the cook's assistant whispered one day when Lillian ventured to the kitchens for a remedy for Emma's headache. Said he'd let the title go extinct before he'd risk loving someone only to lose them. Lillian tried to ignore the gossip. The Duke's personal tragedies were none of her concern. Her duty was to Emma, who was slowly beginning to trust her. Yet she could not help watching him from a distance when their paths crossed, noting the careful way he held himself apart from everyone, as though human contact might shatter some essential barrier he had constructed around himself. On a rainy afternoon in her 4th week at Thornfield, Lillian was reading to Emma in the library when the door opened and the Duke entered. Both rose immediately, but he waved them back to their seats. "Continue," he said, moving to a desk in the corner where he began sorting through papers. Lillian resumed reading from The Tempest, conscious of his presence. When they reached Prospero's speech about his magical powers, she felt rather than saw the Duke's attention shift to them. "I have bedimmed the noontide sun, called forth the mutinous winds, and twixt the green sea and the azured vault set roaring war," she read, giving the words appropriate gravity. "Why does Prospero tell Miranda about his powers now?" the Duke suddenly asked. Emma looked startled at her uncle's intervention. Lillian closed the book. "What do you think, Lady Emma?" she prompted. The girl frowned in concentration. Because he wants her to know what he can do before the storm brings the ship." "Perhaps," the Duke said, standing and approaching them. "Or perhaps because knowledge is another form of power, and he wishes his daughter to be prepared." "Yes," Lillian agreed, surprised by his insight. "Prospero recognizes that protecting Miranda from knowledge doesn't truly keep her safe." The Duke's eyes met hers, and for a moment, Lillian glimpsed something behind his mask: intelligence, appreciation, perhaps even approval. "Lady Emma," he said, still looking at Lillian, "how progresses your education under Miss Reed's guidance?" Emma straightened. "Very well, Uncle. Miss Reed is strict but fair. She doesn't let me abandon difficult subjects simply because I dislike them." "Indeed?" A hint of amusement crossed his features. "That is commendable, Miss Reed." "Thank you, Your Grace. I should like a weekly report on Lady Emma's progress," he said. "Fridays, after dinner. You will join me in my study." With that, he departed, leaving Lillian with an unexpected sense of anticipation mingled with caution. The Duke's sudden interest in Emma's education might be nothing more than a guardian's duty, or it might represent a dangerous complication in her carefully ordered existence. The Friday meeting established a new pattern. Each week, Lillian would present herself in the Duke's study to discuss Emma's progress. Initially, their conversations were formal and brief. But as weeks passed, they began to range beyond Emma's education to literature, philosophy, and music. Lillian discovered that beneath his forbidding exterior, the Duke possessed a brilliant mind and unexpected depths of knowledge. "You are unusually well educated for a governess, Miss Reed," he remarked one evening after they had debated the merits of Wordsworth versus Byron. "Your understanding of the Romantic poet surpasses that of most university men." "My father was a scholar before his death," Lillian replied carefully. "He believed girls deserved education equal to boys. A progressive view." The Duke studied her with that penetrating gaze that seemed to see through pretense. "And yet you speak of him with a certain distance." Lillian hesitated. "I was very young when my parents died. My memories are fragments only, as are Emma's of her parents." He moved to the window, his profile outlined against the night sky. "Memory is both blessing and curse. To remember is to keep alive what we have lost. To forget is its own kind of death." The raw emotion in his voice startled her. For an instant, his guard had lowered, revealing the wounded man beneath the ducal armor. "Perhaps," Lillian said softly, "what matters most is not what we remember, but what we choose to do with those memories." He turned back to her, his expression unreadable. "An optimistic philosophy, Miss Reed." "Not optimism, Your Grace. Survival." Something changed between them that night, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who had each constructed careful defenses against a world that had shown them little mercy. Summer faded into autumn, and as the leaves turned gold and crimson, Lillian found herself looking forward to their Friday discussions with an eagerness that troubled her. She knew the danger of forgetting her place, of mistaking intellectual compatibility for something more. The Duke remained formal in company, addressing her as Miss Reed and maintaining appropriate distance. Yet in the privacy of his study, when they debated ideas or shared observations about Emma, she sometimes caught him watching her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. Emma, too, had noticed the change in her uncle. "Uncle James asked about our lessons at breakfast," she reported one morning. "He's never done that before. And he smiled when I told him you were teaching me about constellations." "His Grace is naturally concerned with your education," Lillian replied neutrally. Emma fixed her with a knowing look far too mature for her 8 years. "He never cared before you came." On a blustery October afternoon, Lillian and Emma were returning from a walk when Emma suddenly darted away, chasing her hat which the wind had snatched. Before Lillian could stop her, the child had run around the corner of the house toward the forbidden west wing. "Emma!" Lillian called, hurrying after her. "You mustn't go there." She found Emma standing beneath a stone balcony, staring up at a window where curtains fluttered in the wind. As Lillian approached, a woman's face appeared briefly at the window, pale, with wild dark hair, before vanishing again. "Who was that?" Emma whispered, clutching Lillian's hand. "I don't know," Lillian said, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "But we must leave immediately. This area is forbidden, remember." As she pulled Emma away, Lillian glanced back at the window. The curtains were still now, but she could not shake the feeling that something, watched from behind the glass. That evening, she debated whether to mention the incident to the Duke. His rule about the West Wing had been absolute, yet surely he should know if someone was occupying rooms there, someone Emma had seen. Her decision was made for her when she arrived at his study for their usual Friday meeting and found him more distant than he had been in weeks. "Lady Emma ventured near the West Wing today," he said without preamble, his voice cold. after my explicit instructions that area was forbidden. Yes, Your Grace. The wind took her hat. I retrieved her immediately. Did you see anything unusual? His question seemed casual, but Lillian sensed the tension beneath it. There was a woman at one of the windows, she answered truthfully. I did not recognize her. The Duke's face hardened. That window overlooks a disused portion of the house. You saw a trick of the light, nothing more. Your Grace, both Emma and I clearly saw, you saw nothing, he interrupted sharply. And you will tell Lady Emma the same. The West Wing houses nothing but old furniture and painful memories. It is forbidden for her safety, the floors are unsound in places. Lillian knew he was lying but could not fathom why. As you wish, Your Grace. You may go, Miss Reed. His dismissal was abrupt, the warmth of recent weeks vanished as though it had never existed. Lillian curtsied and left, troubled by both the mysterious figure and the Duke's reaction. That night, sleep eluded her as questions multiplied in her mind. Who was the woman in the West Wing? Why would the Duke deny her existence? Was she a relative, a servant, or something else entirely? The next morning brought no answers but a fresh complication. A letter arrived from London announcing that the Duke's cousin, Lord Peter Lanchester, would be visiting for a fortnight with his daughter, Lady Catherine. Their arrival 3 days later transformed the quiet routine of Thornfield. Lord Peter was the Duke's opposite in every way, jovial, talkative, fond of hunting and cards. Lady Catherine, at 16, was a poised young woman clearly being groomed for her debut in London society the following spring. Miss Reed, the Duke said after introducing her to his relatives at dinner, Lady Catherine will join Lady Emma's lessons during their stay. Lord Peter believes she would benefit from your instruction in Italian and music before her presentation at court. Lillian recognized the statement for what it was, not a request but a command, and possibly a punishment for her questions about the West Wing. Teaching a debutante alongside a child 8 years her junior would be challenging at best, impossible at worst. Nevertheless, she smiled and nodded. It would be my pleasure, Your Grace. Lord Peter beamed. Wonderful. Catherine's accomplishments need polishing. A few weeks with a proper governess will do her good. Catherine herself looked less than pleased, eyeing Lillian with thinly veiled disdain. I've had the finest instructors in London, Papa. I hardly think I need lessons with the children's teacher. The Duke's expression darkened. Miss Reed's qualifications are exceptional, Catherine. You would be fortunate to achieve half her proficiency in languages or music. His defense, unexpected and forceful, silenced Catherine and earned Lillian a speculative look from Lord Peter. The Duke rarely praised anyone, and never with such conviction. The following days proved difficult. Catherine resented being placed under Lillian's authority and made her displeasure known through 1,000 small rebellions, arriving late to lessons, performing tasks carelessly, making cutting remarks about Lillian's clothes and manners. How dreary it must be, she remarked one afternoon as Lillian corrected her Italian pronunciation, to spend one's life teaching other people's children, with no hope of a family of one's own. Emma, who had grown protective of Lillian, bristled. Miss Reed could marry if she wanted. She's beautiful and clever. Catherine laughed. Beautiful? Perhaps in a common sort of way. But no gentleman marries a governess, silly child. They're like furniture, useful but ultimately disposable. Lillian maintained her composure. That's enough, Lady Catherine. Please translate the next passage. Later, she overheard Catherine speaking to her father in the garden. Cousin James watches the governess when he thinks no one notices. It's rather pathetic, don't you think? A duke mooning after a penniless nobody. Mind your tongue, Catherine, Lord Peter replied sharply. James has endured more tragedy than you can comprehend. If he finds comfort in intellectual conversation with Miss Reed, it's no concern of ours. But surely you didn't bring me here to watch him dishonor Beatrice's memory by dallying with the help. I brought you here because James is your guardian if anything happens to me, and because Thornfield will someday belong to your husband if James doesn't remarry. Family connections matter, daughter. Remember that. Lillian retreated, heart pounding. She had suspected Lord Peter had ulterior motives for his visit, but the nakedness of his ambition shocked her. More disturbing was Catherine's casual cruelty and the suggestion that the Duke might harbour feelings for Lillian beyond intellectual respect. That evening at dinner, Catherine mentioned a piece of gossip from London: a baronet's daughter had been caught eloping with her music master. How utterly disgraceful, she said, watching Lillian from beneath her lashes. Imagine throwing away one's position in society for a man with no prospects or connections. The Duke set down his fork with deliberate care. I find nothing disgraceful in choosing happiness over society's arbitrary rules, Catherine. The truly disgraceful behavior is judging others to elevate oneself. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Lord Peter cleared his throat. James, I've been meaning to tell you, Lady Harrington is hosting a ball next month. She particularly asked me to extend an invitation. It's been 6 years. Perhaps it's time you returned to society. I have no interest in Lady Harrington's ball or London society, the Duke replied coldly. James, Lord Peter persisted, you have responsibilities to your title, to your family name. You cannot hide at Thornfield forever. Beatrice would not have wanted, do not, the Duke interrupted, his voice deadly quiet, presume to tell me what Beatrice would have wanted. He stood abruptly. Miss Reed, a word about Lady Emma's progress, if you please. Lillian followed him from the dining room, acutely aware of Catherine's speculative gaze and Lord Peter's frown. The Duke led her not to his study but to the conservatory, where orchids bloomed in defiance of the autumn chill outside. Forgive me, he said when they were alone. I needed to escape before I said something unforgivable to my cousin. There's nothing to forgive, Your Grace. He turned to her, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. There is much to forgive, Miss Reed. I have not been kind to you. After our discussion about the West Wing, I retreated behind walls I built long ago. It was easier than facing certain truths. Lillian's heart raced. What truths, Your Grace? That I find your company more essential than I should. That our conversations have become the hours I most anticipate. He moved closer. That when you speak of Wordsworth or debate the merits of Mozart over Beethoven, I glimpse a world beyond the prison of grief I built for myself. Your Grace, Lillian whispered, torn between longing and caution, I am your employee. Lady Catherine rightly observed that society does not permit friendship between those in our positions. And do you always bow to society's dictates, Miss Reed? He was close enough now that she could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes. You, who defy convention to educate yourself, who speaks her mind even to a duke? I have learned the cost of defying convention, she said softly. Each position lost, each door closed, they are the price of being a woman alone in the world. He reached out, his fingers hovering near her cheek without touching her. What if you were not alone? Before she could answer, the conservatory door opened and Mrs. Winters appeared. Forgive me, Your Grace, but there's a disturbance in the West Wing. She's become agitated. The Duke's face transformed, all openness vanishing. I'll come at once. Miss Reed, please return to the dining room. He departed with Mrs. Winters, leaving Lillian shaken by both his near confession and the cryptic reference to the West Wing's occupant. The mysterious she could no longer be dismissed as a trick of the light or Lillian's imagination. That night, Lillian was woken by screams, wild, inhuman howls that echoed through the corridors. She threw on her dressing gown and opened her door to find several servants hurrying toward the west wing. "What's happening?" she asked a passing maid. "It's her again," the girl whispered fearfully. "The mad lady. She's escaped her rooms." Before Lillian could question her further, the sound of breaking glass and more screams drew her toward the forbidden wing. She knew she should return to her room, but concern for Emma, and, if she were honest, for the Duke, propelled her forward. The scene she encountered in a corridor of the West Wing would haunt her dreams for years to come. The Duke and two footmen were restraining a wild-haired woman in a torn nightgown who fought with inhuman strength, her nails raking bloody furrows down one footman's cheek. Her face, once beautiful, was contorted with rage and madness, her eyes vacant of recognition or reason. "Beatrice, please," the Duke was saying, his voice breaking. "You must return to your rooms. The doctor will be here soon." Beatrice, the Duchess of Lanchester, the wife everyone believed had died 6 years ago in childbed. As if sensing Lillian's presence, the Duke looked up. The expression that crossed his face, shame, despair, fury, struck her like a physical blow. "Get out," he commanded, his voice flat. "Return to your room, Miss Reed." Lillian backed away, then turned and fled, her mind reeling with the implications of what she had witnessed. The Duke's wife was alive, but clearly, catastrophically insane. The forbidden wing, the mysterious figure, the Duke's perpetual mourning, all took on new, horrifying meaning. She spent the night in sleepless turmoil. By morning, she had reached the only possible conclusion: she must leave Thornfield immediately. Whatever her feelings for the Duke, and she could no longer deny, even to herself, that they had grown far beyond appropriate respect, she could not remain in a household built on such a terrible secret. As she packed her meager belongings, a knock sounded at her door. She opened it to find the Duke, his face haggard, eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. "May I enter?" he asked, his voice roughened by exhaustion. Propriety demanded she refuse, but she stepped aside. He closed the door behind him and noticed her half-packed trunk. "You're leaving?" "It wasn't a question." "I must, Your Grace." "James," he said quietly. "After what you witnessed last night, I think you might call me James." "What I witnessed," Lillian said carefully, "was a private family matter that I had no right to see." "What you witnessed," he corrected, sinking into the room's single chair, "was the reason I have lived as half a man for 6 years. The secret that has kept me prisoner in my own home. Your wife lives." Lillian remained standing, maintaining what distance she could in the small room. "Beatrice lives, yes. But my wife—" He closed his eyes briefly. "My wife died the night our son was born. Her body survived, but her mind, her soul, was lost. Childbed fever took her reason, Miss Reed. When the fever broke, she did not know me, did not recognize her home or her name. She tried to strangle our infant son, believing him a demon sent to torment her." Lillian gasped softly. "The child?" "Died 3 days later. Whether from her actions or natural causes, the doctors could never say with certainty." His voice was hollow. "I could not bear to commit Beatrice to an asylum. The conditions, they are barbaric. So I created one here, in the West Wing. Private nurses, the best doctors. For 6 years, I have maintained the fiction that she died, while keeping her comfortable and cared for." "Why the secrecy? Surely your family would have insisted she be institutionalized." "My father was still alive then, and he believed appearances mattered above all else. A mad duchess, locked in the family home? Unthinkable. Better a tragic young widow and a convenient fiction. He looked up at her. I did not trust you with the truth at first. By the time I knew I could, the lie had become too established to easily unravel. Lillian's heart ached for him, for the impossible position he had occupied for so many years, for the duty that had become a prison. I understand why you did as you did, she said softly. But surely you see that I cannot stay. Not now. Because of what others might think? Because Catherine's cruel words contain a kernel of truth about how the world would judge us. Because you are married, Lillian said simply. Whatever your wife's condition, whatever my feelings might be, that fact remains immutable. He stood and approached her, close enough that she could see the grief etched in lines around his eyes. And what are your feelings, Lillian? The use of her given name, so intimate after months of formal address, nearly undid her resolve. They don't matter. They can't matter. They matter to me. His voice was low, urgent. I have lived half a life for 6 years, bound by duty and guilt. Then you arrived, and suddenly I remembered what it was to feel alive, to anticipate each day rather than merely endure it. Is that not worth fighting for? At what cost? Lillian asked. Your reputation? Your position in society? The respect of your peers? These are not small sacrifices, Your Grace. James, he insisted. And none of those things matter compared to, a sharp knock interrupted him. Without waiting for a response, Catherine burst into the room, her face alight with malicious triumph. So it's true, she said, taking in their proximity with obvious satisfaction. The servants are whispering that you spent the night in the West Wing with a madwoman, Cousin James. And now I find you in the governess's bedchamber at dawn. How delightfully scandalous. The Duke's expression hardened. You forget yourself, Catherine. Leave us. I think not. She smiled coldly. Father will be most interested to learn that Cousin Beatrice is alive, if insane, and that you've been deceiving the family for years, all while pursuing an inappropriate relationship with the help. I wonder what the Lord Chancellor would make of your fitness as Emma's guardian, given such evidence. Get out, the Duke growled, advancing on her with such menace that Catherine retreated a step. Gladly. I've seen all I need to see. She flounced out, slamming the door behind her. The Duke turned back to Lillian, his expression grave. This changes everything. Catherine will use what she's learned to try to take Emma and Thornfield. I cannot allow that. What will you do? Lillian asked, her own concerns momentarily forgotten in the face of this new threat. What I should have done years ago. He squared his shoulders. I will bring the truth to light on my own terms, before Catherine can distort it. And then I will petition the Church for an annulment of my marriage on grounds of Beatrice's incurable insanity. Is that possible? Difficult, but not impossible. With testimony from her doctors and given the duration of her condition. He ran a hand through his hair. It will mean exposure, scandal, public scrutiny of our most private suffering. But it may be the only way to protect Emma and... He met Lillian's eyes. And to free myself from a bond that exists only in law, not in reality. Lillian shook her head. You cannot make such a momentous decision because of me. I make it because of Emma, because of my responsibility to Thornfield and its people, and yes, because of you. He took her hands in his. Stay, Lillian. Help me through what comes next. Not as my employee, but as my friend, at least. Perhaps, in time, as something more. The hope in his eyes undid her. I will stay until Emma is secure, she conceded. Beyond that, I can promise nothing." "It is enough," he said, raising her hand to his lips. "For now, it is enough." The following weeks brought the chaos Lillian had feared. Lord Peter, initially shocked by the revelation of Beatrice's survival, quickly shifted to calculating the political and social ramifications. Catherine, thwarted in her attempt to use the information as leverage, retreated into sullen silence before departing with her father for London, where rumours about the madwoman of Thornfield were already beginning to circulate. The Duke travelled to London to consult with lawyers and church officials about the possibility of an annulment, a controversial and rarely granted release from marriage. In his absence, Lillian continued Emma's education while helping Mrs. Winters manage the household, which was increasingly besieged by curious visitors and gossip-mongers. "They say the Duke kept his mad wife chained in the attic," Emma reported one day, repeating servants' gossip. "And that you helped him hide her existence so he could marry you instead." "People often invent dramatic stories when the truth is both simpler and sadder," Lillian replied, struggling to maintain her composure. "Your uncle kept your Aunt Beatrice here because he loved her and wanted to protect her, not imprison her. Will he have to send her away now?" "I don't know," Lillian admitted. "That will be for doctors and lawyers to decide." The Duke returned after a fortnight, looking older but somehow unburdened. He summoned Lillian to his study immediately. "The church will consider my petition," he announced without preamble. "But the process may take months, even years. In the meantime, I have arranged for Beatrice to be transferred to a private sanatorium in Switzerland, comfortable, humane, with the best medical care available." "That seems wise," Lillian said carefully. "And Emma?" "My guardianship remains intact, despite Peter's machinations." The Lord Chancellor was not impressed by accusations from a man so clearly motivated by financial interest in my estate. He moved closer. "Which leaves only the question of you, Lillian." "Me?" "Society already believes the worst. That I kept Beatrice hidden while pursuing you. That our relationship is improper." He took her hands. "I cannot offer you marriage, not yet. Perhaps not for years. But I can offer you honesty, respect, and whatever happiness we might build together while we wait." Lillian withdrew her hands. "You ask me to live as your what? Your companion? Your mistress? To sacrifice my reputation, my future prospects, on the chance that someday you might be free. I ask you to follow your heart rather than society's arbitrary rules." His eyes were intense. "Is that not what you've always done, in your way? Educating yourself beyond what was considered proper for a woman? Speaking your mind when others would have you silent?" "Those were private rebellions that harmed no one," Lillian protested. "What you suggest would make me a social pariah." "And what of Emma? What lesson would we teach her about propriety and honor? That love matters more than convention. That happiness should be seized when found, for it is all too rare and precious." He reached for her again, and this time she did not pull away. "I love you, Lillian Reed. I believe you love me too. Is that not worth fighting for?" The word she had never expected to hear from a duke, from any man of position and power, struck her with physical force. Love. Not infatuation or desire, but love, the recognition of her mind, her character, her true self. "I cannot," she whispered, even as her heart cried otherwise. "I have seen too many women destroyed by believing a man's promises." "Then don't believe my promises," he said. "Believe my actions. I have begun the process of establishing a trust for you or a house, an income, investments in your name alone. Whether you choose to stay with me or not, you will never again be at the mercy of employers or circumstance." Lillian stared at him. "You would give me my independence?" I would give you the freedom to choose. To stay because you wish to, not because you must. He smiled slightly. Is that not what you have always wanted? The liberty to determine your own path. Tears filled her eyes. Why would you do this? Because I love you, he said simply. Because your happiness matters to me as much as my own. Because I would rather see you free and fulfilled elsewhere than caged and diminished here. In that moment, Lillian recognized the truth that had eluded her for so long. She had built her life around the belief that love was a luxury reserved for those with fortune and family, that for a woman alone in the world, attachment meant vulnerability and inevitable pain. Yet here was a man offering her not possession but partnership, not security in exchange for submission but the very independence she had always craved. I do love you, she admitted, the words both terrifying and liberating. But I fear, don't, he interrupted gently. Fear has governed us both long enough. Let us be brave together, Lillian. He drew her into his arms, and for the first time since her parents' death, Lillian allowed herself to believe that love might be not a trap but a refuge, not a weakness but a strength. In the months that followed, scandal swirled around Thornfield Hall. The newspapers published lurid accounts of the Duke's madwoman and his governess mistress. Former friends cut the Duke in London clubs, invitations to society events stopped arriving. Yet within Thornfield itself, a different reality took shape, one built on truth rather than appearances, on genuine affection rather than social obligation. Lillian moved into a cottage on the estate grounds, close enough to continue Emma's education, far enough to maintain some propriety. The Duke visited daily, and together they built a life outside society's constraints. They read poetry in the gardens, played chess by the fire, debated philosophy, and gradually healed each other's wounds. Emma, far from being corrupted by their unconventional arrangement, flourished in an environment of honesty and genuine care. You smile now, she told her uncle one evening as they sat together in the library. Both of you. You never smiled before. The church's deliberations continued, moving with glacial slowness through canonical courts and ecclesiastical reviews. A year passed, then two. The scandal faded as newer, more titillating stories captured London's attention. Some of the Duke's more progressive friends began to visit again, accepting Lillian's ambiguous position with discreet understanding. On a crisp autumn day 3 years after Lillian had first arrived at Thornfield, a letter arrived bearing the Archbishop's seal. The Duke read it in his study, then walked directly to Lillian's cottage without stopping to don a coat despite the chill air. She opened her door to find him standing there, letter in hand, his expression unreadable. James? What is it? The church has granted the annulment, he said, his voice carefully controlled. Beatrice's condition has been deemed permanent and incurable by the medical authorities. Our marriage has been declared null. Lillian's heart raced. You're free. We're free, he corrected, dropping to one knee on her cottage doorstep. Lillian Reed, you have taught me that love is not possession but liberation. That happiness comes not from conforming to others' expectations but from having the courage to be truly ourselves. Will you marry me, not because society dictates it or because you need my protection, but because we have found in each other the freedom to be who we truly are? Lillian looked at the man kneeling before her, the Duke who had set aside his title's weight to become simply James, the grieving widower who had learned to laugh again, the proud aristocrat who had defied convention for love. She saw in his eyes not the emptiness she had first encountered, but the same joy she felt in her own heart. Yes, she said, pulling him to his feet and into her arms. Yes, I will marry you, James Lanchester, not for your title or your fortune, but for the man you are and the life we've built together. Their wedding, held in Thornfield's small chapel the following spring, was a quiet affair attended by only a few friends and the estate staff. Emma served as bridesmaid, beaming with pride as Lillian walked down the aisle in a simple gown of ivory silk. Society whispered, of course. The Duke, who had hidden his mad wife and married his children's governess, would always be the subject of gossip in certain circles. But as years passed and the Duchess of Lanchester established schools for orphaned girls across the county, providing them with the education and opportunities she had fought so hard for herself, even the most censorious voices gradually softened. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked her one evening as they sat in the library, grey beginning to thread through his dark hair, lines of happiness rather than sorrow etched around his eyes. The scandal, the social isolation of those first years? Lillian looked up from the letter she was writing, correspondence with a member of Parliament about expanding educational opportunities for women, and smiled at the man who had helped her transform not only her own life but the lives of countless girls like her younger self. "Not for a moment," she said truthfully. "We built something better than what society offered us, something true. What is there to regret in that?" He crossed the room to kiss her, still with the wonder of a man who had never expected to find happiness again. "Nothing at all, my love. Nothing at all."